Is it propaganda? It may well be. I mean, but you don't really know if it's just propaganda or efforts at slander against you until you know what it is. This book, Private Empire, ExxonMobil and American Power by Steve Cole, a Pulitzer Prize winning author. Mr. Cole is author of a New York Times bestseller about the Bin Ladens. He also has been a staff writer for the New Yorker. He was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 1990. In his book, Chapter 12, this is how it starts. I'm going to read excerpts because I think they're important. First, I'm going to acknowledge I've read parts of Laura Bush's biography, and her recounting of this event is a little different than how it's presented here, right? But I'll stick with what we have here. On Wednesday evening, November 14th, 2001, Vladimir Putin and his wife joined George W. Bush, the president's wife, Laura, and about 24 friends and cabinet officials for a dinner at Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas. The guests wore jeans and boots. The menu included southern fried catfish. Putin stood to deliver a toast. Referring to his host, he said that the United States was, quote, fortunate at this critical time in its history to have a man of such character at its helm, end quote. Bush returned the compliments. In June, when he had met Putin for the first time in Slovenia, Bush said that he had, quote, looked the man in the eye, end quote, and had discerned, quote, a sense of his soul, end quote. Bush had been mocked for this claim, but in Crawford, he again mentioned his respect for Putin's soul. And he told the Russian president that he sought to, quote, transform the relationship between our two countries, end quote. Now, this is where it gets important, right? In the oil industry in particular, Russian requirements and American capabilities overlapped. Oil and gas production made up a large share of the Russian economy, so free market reforms in the oil sector might provide a transformational catalyst for the entire country. Russia possessed at least 60 billion barrels of proved oil reserves, according to Oil and Gas Journal, and 1,680 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves, a quarter of the world's total and more than any other nation. For American oil companies, ownership of even a modest percentage of that bounty could be transformational. The hypothesis Evans and others in the Bush administration pursued after the Crawford dinner was that a strategic campaign to deepen commercial ties between oil companies in the United States and Russia might transform Russia's internal politics, remake U.S. Russian relations, and even alter the global geopolitics of oil. President George H.W. Bush had seen oil for friendship as a critical element of his campaign to build a partnership with Mikhail Gorbachev as the Soviet Union cracked up. Bush persuaded Gorbachev to endorse Chevron's pioneering, lucrative entrance into the Tengiz oil project in the then Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan. George W. Bush intended something similar with Putin, whose intentions as a political leader and as a sponsor of market-led modernization were at best enigmatic. Bush did not see Russia only through the prism of oil, but he did regard energy policy as critical to his ambitions for his relationship with Putin. Bush's national security advisors, led by Condoleezza Rice, an academic specialist on Russia, and her deputy, Stephen Hadley, sought to construct a more cooperative relationship with Moscow, one that might coax Putin's government toward an embrace of democratic capitalism and diplomatic normalcy with Europe. They knew there inevitably would be tensions and disagreements that would drag them back to rivalry. To prevent or at least limit that recurrence of old think, Bush and his advisors concluded that they needed to find 3 or 4 shared projects that would invest Putin and the Kremlin in a broad, pragmatic, ongoing pattern of U.S. Russian cooperation. Space programs, and particularly the management of the International Space Station, offered one such pathway. Counterterrorism and preventing nuclear proliferation after the September 11th attacks also appeared to be promising. But the project with the greatest potential, the one that might literally invest the United States in Russia's success and vice versa, involved Russia's oil and gas production. Now, we're going to go a little further in here. It was not until 1996 that ExxonMobil closed on terms for what became known as the Sakhalin 1 project. It was an undertaking that would test the corporation's engineering prowess like no other. Hurricane winds swept the Sakhalin region each autumn, and ice packs up to 6 feet thick built up during the winter. After the spring, melting ice floes threatened to knock down any offshore oil rig in their way. Exxon decided on a plan to drill a 7 mile horizontal well from mainland Russia underneath the ocean waters. It was the only well of its kind in the world. Sakhalin 1 suggested some of the appeal of Western oil technology and engineering skills to Russia. But to make the deal on terms acceptable to Exxon, Russia's government had to set aside its nationalism and share oil ownership. The Sakhalin 1 deal had been made at the nod of Boris Yeltsin era. Post-communist enthusiasm about democracy and private enterprise had yielded to disillusionment and backlash as bankers and other new Russian oligarchs seized control of former Soviet state property in corrupt transactions. I'm sorry, I just have to ask. Does anybody know about the history of Texas Commerce? Does anybody know about the merger of Texas Commerce with Chemical Bank from New York? Does anybody know about the acquisition of what was the result of the merger of Texas Commerce and Chemical Bank by Chase Manhattan? I'm sorry, we're talking about oligarchs and corrupt transactions. During this period, ExxonMobil was one of 3 Western oil corporations to enter into production sharing agreements, or PSAs, contracts that allowed for direct oil ownership by the foreign firms, and also sought to segregate arbitration rights in the deal from the morass of Russian law. Rex Tillerson had followed Kuntz as the lead ExxonMobil executive in Russia. He managed a Russia account from a base in Texas, flying over as necessary. Tillerson formed a friendship with the Sakhalin governor and decided to rope in a state-owned Russian oil firm as a project partner so that ExxonMobil and the Russian government would be, quote, on the same side of the table, end quote, as Tillerson put it, if disputes over the project arose. ExxonMobil had connections at Rosneft, one of the smaller state-owned oil and gas companies, with about 10% of the country's reserves, a company widely regarded as a bureaucratic mess even by Russia's standards. Around 1995, Lee Raymond had met with Rosneft executives to talk about a possible acquisition of the firm. The Russian company's leaders said that they were willing to merge into Exxon and, as it's quoted, begged and pleaded, end quote, to be acquired, as an executive involved recalled it. But Raymond declined because even Rosneft's leaders seemed unsure about what their company legally owned. Rosneft's participation in the Sakhalin project provided some protection, and the legal and arbitration protections in the PSA helped too, but the deal remained politically vulnerable. In Moscow, delays, arguments, and disputes over environmental issues, pipeline routes, and other subjects stalked Sakhalin 1 from its inception. Under pressure, Tillerson applied the Exxon formula, no surrender. Quote, we jacked this all the way up to the top, end quote, recalled one of his colleagues. Quote, we brought the issue up with the president, Putin, and we said, look, we have got the contract signed. We're doing everything we are supposed to do. Here are the rules. And these guys don't want to follow the rules. What are you going to do about it? End quote. Putin offered to write out an executive order saying that Sakhalin 1 could proceed, but Tillerson refused. Putin did not have enough legal authority to satisfy ExxonMobil. Tillerson said he did not want to operate by decree, but by durable laws. Now, this sounds like a pattern, all right. This sounds like a pattern of saying you're going to need to figure out how to change your laws to meet our bottom line. I could be wrong. That's exactly what I've been watching, literally, actively, for the last 5 years right here. And I haven't seen a goddamn oil and gas field. I haven't seen a damn refinery. I haven't had a conversation with anybody that says anything more than something that starts basically with, look, little lady, right? And unfortunately, we're coming up on the last year of what would be the 5th year after I received certification in non-destructive testing that was supposed to be used to actually provide inspection services in regards to gas and oil pipelines. The truth of the matter is my medical treatment is supposed to be a private confidential matter. But rather than actually supporting me in being able to acquire and maintain proficiency in actually performing industrial inspection services, what I keep getting is somebody trying to make a justification to use my name, reference, and my past political capital and my past human capital to get cheaper drugs. And meanwhile, that's just one book, right? That's just one book that I was able to get from the public library before, right? Now we're in the situation we're in. My understanding is from another book that after the decline of the Soviet Union, everybody in the former Soviet Union was issued a form of certificate in relationship to an understanding that they were actually equity owners in the former state enterprises of the Soviet Union. And at a certain point in time, there was a major gas and oil company that was being courted in that way they do in Texas, where they make every business relationship sound like it's a potential for a romantic relationship. And then once you get romantic, depending upon your situs at the time of the romance, it then sets terms of expected production in terms of quality, but the actual price point can be negotiated depending upon the delivery of services, if you know what I mean. I'm serious. And for the rest of the people of a nation state that had been privatized, that were given notification that they were equity owners in those former state enterprises, when the state then says, well, now we are in a process where we are engaging in a business relationship and you can redeem that certificate to actually be an owner in that venture. Well, now you got a very serious problem, right? You got a very serious problem because you keep trying to convince people that they're sick and they need you to help them from somebody down the road, including somebody in a completely contrived religious context or in some sort of fake medical modality. And this isn't about me needing your help. I'm an equity owner, and what you're doing is completely illegal. And all of your smooth talking and all of your attempts at intimidation and extortion have not actually yielded anything close to the results that you said you were going to provide a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago in my situation. See, like it or not, 25 years ago, I understood that I was going to be able to go to college and get a degree so that I could pursue a particular course in my life professionally. You didn't let that happen. Why? I had more than the financial capability to sustain my education. What was your undisclosed ulterior motive? Did you expect me to pay on somebody else's lapsed speculation from those deals hooked up at the college I went to 10 years before? Yes, you did. But you didn't want to acknowledge that so that I could be put in an appropriate course of action to fulfill any attendant obligations that I was put into. See, if somebody else had debt and then somehow I ended up becoming an owner of their debt, that wasn't what you told me. You told me I was going to college so that I could get a degree and then I could be able to participate in the functioning of the country and in the matters related to my life. And 20 years later, where am I? I'm on site in Houston, Texas, with a bunch of bad oil brokers and their subsidiaries in their derivatives market, trying to hook up completely fraudulent billing records associated with alleged medical treatment so they can do what? Because I sure as hell have not gotten any time on the clock or any credit for my education in non-destructive testing in order to provide inspection services of gas and oil pipelines, have I? And that's your fraud. And now you've got 35 years of it. 35 years of intentionally engaging in fraud around your own alleged industrial endeavors. 35 years that you've intentionally defrauded your own sector and your own people. Everybody you strong-armed into getting some law to cover you up is now implicated in massive illegal insurance underwriting schemes. Because that seems to be all you really wanted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If you're a legislator in the state of Texas and you agree to change the law to go into effect on September 1st of 2001, you need to be right now getting all the evidence you still have. And if you allowed for it to be bartered off to some broker or some sort of dealer so that they could use it in illegal underwriting, you need to tell them to get all of the evidence they still have together as well.